welcome back, listeners, to another conversation on the BizBlend podcast. I'm your host, Sana. And as you know, this is the show where we untangle the complex threads of business growth, strategy, and leadership with some of the most insightful minds in the industry. Now, we are diving deep into a topic that's become a game changer for many businesses, for of all sizes, in fact, strategic marketing and the role of a fractional CMO. Joining me is someone whose 3 decade career has transformed brands we all know. Now, listeners, think AT&T, Purina, Arby's, Johnny Rockets, and countless others you might know but have likely interacted with. From building and selling two companies to leading both global and startup marketing teams to driving revenue driving opportunities with minimal risk. Today's guest brings unmatched experience to the table. So, whether it's building a brand from scratch, repositioning in a crowded market, or taking a product from idea to launch, he has done it all, listeners. And he's here to show us why fractional CMOs are becoming the secret weapon for businesses wanting big results without the big executive payroll. So, meet my guest, Angelo Ponzi. So, Angel, welcome to the show, and I'm really happy to have you here with us.
Well, thank you so much. I'm excited to be here. I love the setup. Thank you for that. And certainly this is a topic near and dear to my heart.
Definitely, Angelo. Okay, begin with let's talk about the difference. Okay, so now let's talk about strategic marketing. Now, many business leaders they confuse tactical marketing activities like social media or ads with strategic marketing. So, how do you define the difference between the two, and why is that distinction so critical for long-term success?
Sure. Most companies that have dealt with over the years, they look at that execution because that's the tangible stuff. That's the stuff they can get their, they can touch and feel. And that's what's interacting with their customers, so to speak. However, on the flip side, a lot of that work, again, in my experience, is being created without input from the most critical folks in their business, and that's their customers. So by talking to their customers, and where I focus is on the strategy side, right? I want to understand what's going on in the market. I want to understand what's going on with the competition. I want to dig into what motivates their customers to buy, to change behaviors, the process they go through in making decisions, all
Mhm.
these different dynamics. And based on that information, we can develop the right way to approach them. And that's really where we get into that strategic thinking is can I grow my business? I hear all the time, hey, we're a 20-year-old company, we're $10 million, and now we want to be 50 million in 3 years. Well, what are you going to do differently? You can't keep doing the same thing over and over again, especially when it took
Yeah.
you 20 years to get to 10, and now you want to, 5 times that. So getting back and really stepping back and looking at what's important, how do I message, what's going to be relevant to my customers, how do they interact with my product, and using that information to develop that kind of strategic approach that gets beyond just a tactical execution, but figuring out the best ways. And as a simple explanation, and if you don't mind, just a couple quick case studies.
Yeah.
One was in the US. This was a few years ago. A lot of the plastic bans were coming into effect. Straw
Yeah.
bans, paper or bag bans of plastic bags. And so my client created a home compostable um, straw, which means it would biodegrade in less than 6 months and those kinds of things. But you would have thought that the market would have went opened arms and embraced them and everybody else that was doing the same thing. But they didn't. Why? Because there was a behavioral change. We were used to using plastic straws forever. Paper straws got to the market quicker than all these kind of compostable products. And
Yeah.
so we needed to understand what was going to change behaviors. We needed to understand what consumers thought about paper, compostable, plastic,
Mm.
metal, all these other different options. Or frankly, a lot of restaurants just said, we're not going to give you a straw. And then understanding then who our targets, we wanted to be in the restaurant chains and the convenience store chains and the hotels. And again, it would seem like just this natural transition, but there were a lot of behavioral issues and financial issues as well that we had to deal with. One of the large restaurant chains here in California, there are in 2 or 3 states, but hundreds of stores. They came to us and said, "We want one straw for every market to deal with any issue, a governmental issue that would come up." The problem was in California, for example, there was a state
Mhm.
ban, a county bans, and city bans. And so by having to understand how we do that in that particular case, we couldn't solve the problem. But we also looked at other areas of why were we seeing a lot of interest coming out of Texas and Georgia, for example. Well, it turned out to be there was a huge concentration of corporate headquarters for restaurant chains and convenience store chains. And so again, how do we get into those? What's important to them? What are their sustainability initiatives? So all that work had to be done so we could create an approach, a strategy in order to, if you will, if you want to use, military terms, right? The strategy in order to go fight the battles. And so that's where I think a strategy, that's what comes into a place. Another client I worked on not too long ago, large HVAC company, and they've been around for 70 some years. And I wanted to talk to their customers. They were like, well, they love us. You don't really need to talk to them, but we did anyway. And what we found out is their primary contacts were mechanical engineers.
Mhm.
Those people were getting ready to retire. And the new generation of engineers actually were not really favorable towards my client at the time. Why? Because they didn't offer any sustainable products, environmentally friendly products, and plus the competitors were not only offering those but offering package deals. So we found some really big growth issues because by talking to our target customers, we understood what was now going on in the market. And again, we could
Mm.
create a strategy and how to change that. Ultimately, within the execute that strategy, of course, now there's some technical things that need to happen, but it isn't just always about social media or ads or TV commercials, whatever it happens to be. Could be getting out into the field more. Could be, I had one software client, the major recommendation for them based on their issue was frankly to go on a road show. Go meet all your top clients, let them know what's going on. Why? Because you hadn't seen them in 5 years.
Mm. That's a really, really good one. Really good one, Angela. And I think this particular insight and approach, it definitely kind of clears the clouds over why this particular campaign is not working, why the results are not happening, why am I not getting the ROI from any meta campaign or this campaign.
Mhm,
I think you really pointed out the most basic thing when it comes to marketing 101. This is knowing your customer,
mhm.
doing surveys and interacting with them on field. So that's a very, very important and crucial takeaway for
Right.
me. I believe all of the listeners, entrepreneurs, founders, small, medium business owners.
In some, advice to your audience, if you will, is I hear this all the time because I mentor at some of the universities and I'll hear from these startups. Hey, we had a great solution, a great product. And my question is, well, did you do any research? And they go, yeah, of course. I talked to my mom and my dad and my sister and brother and my cousins and aunts and uncles. They all loved it. That's not market research, right? Sitting around the room and even companies that have been in existence for years that are making decisions that are going to potentially impact the company, but they
Mhm.
never actually go out into the market. And so keep in mind, doing research is not it's necessary. It doesn't have to be real expensive, but I do encourage if any of your audience wants to do some research, that if they're going to interview or talk to customers, your discussion guide, and then assign it to the one or two people that can do it consistently, right? Because my
Mm.
cadence and the way I do it is going to be different the way you do it and different the way, my partner does it.
Yeah.
And if we're all doing it and then we try to merge all that data together, we don't know what kind of bias we have. And I think that's another mistake because it's like, oh, all my salespeople are giving me information. Well, are you getting the clear picture or are you getting a kind of a filtered or biased view, that
Mhm.
so again, this is something I always encourage if you're going to do some research, make sure, especially interviews, that there's a consistency in the person, because then that they get the cadence, they understand what's going on, they understand the pivots, um, and versus trying to do it with multiple people.
That's another good one. That's a golden one, Angela. Um, Now, okay, let's talk about fractional CMO, of course. So now, I have heard the term fractional CMO quite a lot, and I also imagine a lot of businesses have heard it, but um, could be that they don't fully grasp it. So, if we can explain the real value of hiring a fractional CMO instead of a full-time CMO, or relying solely on in-house marketing teams.
Sure. Well, I think you alluded to it a little bit, and part of it's price, but it's also experience. Um, for small to medium sized businesses to bring on a seasoned CMO, in a lot of cases, it's very, very costly.
Mhm.
And the other side of the coin I hear sometimes is I don't know how we would keep, frankly, like me, someone like you busy 40 hours a week. And and so the idea that you can save on salary and overhead and all of that, but still get the experience and the strategic insights that a fractional CMO can bring, and
Mhm.
then work with, whether it's an internal team or whether you're putting teams together that really become more of those executors, if you will. Because a lot of times I run into folks and that are, not talking to anybody specific, but I'm a director of marketing or I'm a, marketing manager, and yet they don't really have the experience to allow them to do the strategic work. Again, it gets more technical. Why? Because that's what management thinks they need. They need those executors, if you will. They need that social media campaign going and things like that. And a lot of management, because they're busy working, on and in the business, they're just assuming everything is correct. And so I find, um, when I've done work and then, handed over the plans, which I used to do at the beginning. This was about 11 and a half years into this company, uh,
Mhm.
I'd get a phone call and said, it's not working the way you laid it out, or we're off plan and we can't figure out why. And 9 out of 10 times it's because senior leadership who I worked with turned it over to, uh, a junior person or somebody not even in marketing to execute, and they had other things to do or another job. Um, and so that, that that kind of implementation side, there's a stat that I use that 92% of all strategies fail due to poor implementation. And so that
Mm.
there's a disconnect taking the strategy and implementing that strategy versus, yeah, just going right to the market and trying to do stuff. We could do a social media campaign for anybody right now. We won't really know what the motivations of the buyers are, but with AI, we could probably create an incredible campaign and come up with some decent copy, but we don't know if it's right or not until we've talked to customers. So back to the CMO side of it. So in many situations when I'm brought in, they are, small to medium sized companies. I say, I work with 5 to 100 million, but I would say my sweet spot's in that 25 to 50, 70,000 million dollar market. And,
Mhm.
but in a lot of cases, there just isn't a me. And they, want that senior leadership, but they can get it on a fractional basis, 10 hours a week, 15 hours a week, and then work with their teams. I worked with a company in the luxury market a few years ago, and, 100 and, I don't know, 60, 70, $80 million company. And I had a complete team, 15, 16 people on staff as in-house marketing. And I was there 3 days a week. But there's other companies I might be 3 days a month, just depending on the needs. And so a
Yeah.
company that needs me needs, you know, a day a week tech saying, there's just a disconnect on what that person's going to do. I'm very holistic in what I do, so I spend a lot of time in data, whether it's internal data, external data,
Mhm.
industry data, just dissecting it and looking, constantly looking and doing analytics and looking for trends and things that we can use and implement. I just
Mhm.
finished a study actually for a new client, and
Mhm.
we're doing brand attributes, if you will, and looking for correlations to recommenders. So I could sit there and say these top 5 things have the strongest correlation to your distribution channel to recommend you. Now that I know that, for example, now we could craft, we could change the website, we could craft emails, we could go to trade shows, right? In simple terms, because now we know what's going to motivate people.
Yes.
And some of these things, and actually, brand was one of the biggest, the number one motivator, the brand image and reputation. Yet, on the
Mhm.
scheme of things, it was ranked, like ninth or 10th on the list. So we've got a disconnect, and so now we know something we have to fix. So now we can lay a strategy to how do we repair any issues with reputation or just building awareness of the brand. A lot of cases, I talk to folks and they say, I just don't know your brand. I was like, well, we've been around, whatever, 50 years. Like, I just never heard of you. So, those kinds of disconnects versus, management saying, hey, we're selling product and services. We got money in the bank. Things are going well. Yeah, but you're not even tapping into your market. I worked with a med tech company, and that they had a very tiny market share compared to what the size of the market was. Knowing that now and knowing some other things, we could, again, change the strategy and how to target and do new business development. And then once they came into the pipeline, how do we move them along quicker? Those kinds of things. That's a strategic approach to growing your business versus, again, doing tactical implementation.
That's interesting. That is interesting. And Angelo, some CEOs would argue here that a fractional leader can't possibly be as invested or effective as someone fully embedded in the organization. What's your response to that?
Well, part of it is, so I spent a lot of time in the advertising agency world. One of my businesses was an agency. And when
Mhm.
a client would give us a project versus putting us on retainers, what we would say to them is, we can do this project, no problem. And when the
Mhm.
project's over, we're done. And if you come back in 2 months for another project, we would have not spent any time thinking about your business in 2 months. And that's why when we're on retainer business, we're always thinking. We had a team that was doing nothing, everybody's constantly got their finger on the pulse. It's kind of the same for me that
Mhm.
when I'm engaged as a fractional, part of my job is deep dive to really understand their business. And and because of my research background, I'm able to I know how to get information, whether it's, through formal research or secondary research or grandmother research, as I like to call it, right? I can utilize data to help understand the market. And then as long as I'm engaged and I'm constantly feeding that, that, that knowledge base, if you will, training myself to constantly um, uh, know what's going on in the market. Now, if they called me and said, "Hey, just do a research project," and when the research project's done, we might be back in another month and have you do a whatever a website. Between that month, I'm just not thinking about their business. So really, when you're looking at a fractional, on a true fractional basis, not a project basis, but fractional, you're engaging with some level of time on a
Mhm.
daily or weekly or monthly basis. And part of that should be that the CMO needs to be engaged, to understand, to dig. I have a weekly call with all my clients, regardless if there's anything specific going on. And we brainstorm, or I sit in their, sales calls and their marketing meetings. Why? Because I need to know what's happening inside so I can do my job in making recommendations. if someone's just standing outside waiting and not really engaging. So like I always say that if I'm going to be your CMO, fractional, I need to have a seat at the table. You can't think of me as the, person down the hallway, or you have to think of me as the person down the hallway, not across the country or whatever it happens to be. And some of my clients have been across the country because you need to make sure I'm getting the same kind of information that you're giving everybody else. That allows me to think and to always, again, keep that my fingers on the pulse of what's going on because so many so many things can change that, whether it's, change in interest rates or politics or the weather or whatever happened. All these things can have an impact. The tariffs right now, are having huge impact on some of my clients. And so we're there figuring out how to deal with them. Do we eat some of the cost? Do we pass it on? Or do we look for alternative sources? That's all strategy, right? What are we going to do? And then once we figure out what the best thing to do is, then there's that implementation, right? If we decide we're going to change vendors from whatever, China to India, well, that's a strategic decision. Now somebody's got to go to India, right? And meet manufacturers and things like that. So, um, versus that they just said, "Hey, I just need you to do this research project." Then, of course, then I disengage after it's over.
Hmm. Yeah. Like you mentioned about grandmother research. I would love to know that, Angelo.
Oh,
I
that
think
term.
yes, yes.
Yeah, I don't send my grandmother out to do research. Uh,
Yeah.
I call it, so I use the term grandmother research or sticking your toe in the water.
Oh,
There's
okay.
Yeah, so it's just gathering some insights. And so even if it's, like say I worked in the alcoholic beverage industry. So, just going to the supermarket, for example, and engaging with people, just and observing them and asking them questions. Look, what's a good wine? How do you choose the best wine? Those kinds of things. Well, you're talking to a handful of people, and it's more observational in some direction, if you will, but it's not enough to do anything that's statistical or for real deep dives, but it's just, again, sticking your toe in the water is probably a better term. But, it's just trying to get some quick insights. So when you're thinking about, what do I really need? What's that strategy? And it's like, okay, now I need a full on quantitative study. I need to talk to, a couple hundred people. The, One of my businesses was in the action sports industry, and for years, as one of my clients, I engaged with one of the big teenage retailers around the country, and I'd travel and we talk to teens and all this. And so when I launched my research company in the action sports industry, I kind of followed that pattern, for example. And I went back to all the same cities and we interviewed a couple thousand kids. But my goal was to boil it down to surfing, skating, and snowboarding. And so I remember my first meeting with a big skateboard company, and they stopped me mid presentation and said, "Well, how many skateboarders did you talk to?" And I said, "Ah, if we extrapolate the data and blah blah blah, maybe a couple hundred. I'm not really sure."
Mhm.
And they're like, "Nope. We need to know very specifically. Come back when you talk to 2,000." Now, if I had approached them with, "Look, we've done some observational data. We stuck our toes in the water, did some grandmother research, and I've got a couple hundred kids that we talked to," then I might have had a different outcome.
Mhm.
They might have still told me the same thing, "Come back when you got 2,000," but my conversation would have been different. And so again, if it's, just think about going to a fast food joint and you're trying to figure out, what do people order? What are their patterns? What are they in the straw is a great example. We would look at, so some of our analysis was, watching people, right? They get their drinks, they get their food, they throw it in the garbage, they leave. Okay, well, that's a pattern. They also ended up being, when we got into more formal research, being one of the criteria that was really a barrier to us, right? Because a lot of the restaurant chains were saying, "Look, we got all these sustainability issues. We got to do, more efficient lighting. We've got to do this and do that." And, most of the people are throwing their stuff away before they leave. Where when we got into the convenience store market, which is like a 7-Eleven, those kinds of stores,
Mhm.
their concern was that people drive up, they get their gas, they come in, they grab their drink, and they get back in their car and they drive away. Good possibility that drink could end up on the side of the road, including the straw. So their mindset was different than a restaurant chain. So again, we discovered that and thought through secondary research and doing some of this grandmother research, and then we were able to go validate our thinking.
Mhm.
Um, Another campaign we worked on once, it was for a wine company, and it was called, Coastal. It was called Callaway Coastal, and our first reaction was, "This is great. We're in California. It's coastal. We'll go get all those beautiful shots down on the ocean and blah, blah, blah." And then as we were starting to develop it, we started talking and thinking, "I wonder how people in Chicago think that live on a lake or upstate New York or, the Gulf of Mexico. How do they think of coastal?" And so we panicked and we set off on a couple months worth of research and just interviewed people that lived on the coast in all parts of the country. And good thing we did because they all thought slightly different than we did here in California. And so we would have failed if we didn't, again, even start to do some grandmother research and think about, are we thinking correctly? Let's do some quick polls. We think we're wrong now. Let's go validate our thinking. And, again, we led to a much bigger study.
Right. That's so many case studies, Angela. And I think this is one of the most effective way to understand and start with the basic. And as you mentioned about these numbers, the sample research and then the number of customers that you're interacting. I would like to bring in the metrics, because m- majority of the times we all speak in the metrics language, like what is the LTV, what is the ROI, what is the budget here,
Mhm.
uh, CPC and all that. So what are, in your experience, Angelo, what are the key metrics that businesses often overlook when evaluating the success of their marketing strategy?
Well, it also depends on whether it's, I'll say B2B or B2C, right? If it's a B2C and it's a soft drink, right? Sold through grocery chains, that data is very accessible. If it's an e-commerce sale, that data is accessible. You can tell, you can look at your ROAS and look at how much money did we spend versus how many did we sell. Um, I, so I, sell, I'm going to talk about it, but I have a book out called The Strategy Blueprint. It's about a couple months now. And so actually ran some ads on Amazon to see, if I could sell some more. And so I was looking at, okay, how much did it cost me? How many books did I sell? Unfortunately, you don't get a lot of royalties when you sell a book on Amazon. So so I had to play my own numbers and say, is it worth doing that, or is it still worth the groundswell that I'm doing? So, but B2B becomes a little more difficult, right? In a restaurant business, I can tell, I drop a coupon, I can see how many people come in. I can see how many burgers I'm selling. I can look at how many burgers I sold versus the cost. So it's a little easier. It's difficult, but it's easier on the consumer side. And the B2B side, we could run ads and organic and paid and go to trade shows. And at the end of the day, it might take, in some cases, like it could take a year before a sale actually happens or the product actually ships. The HVAC company I was talking about earlier,
Mhm.
they have to be spec'd in. That whole process could take 6, 8 months. Then let's say they finally get spec'd in. Let's say they win the bid. They might not deliver product for a year or 2. And so, all that has to be kind of built into your cost of marketing and sales, and then also your cash flow. I mean, if you're not delivering product for 2 years after you build it, you're not really getting the bulk of your money, if you will, until much later. So all that has to be factored in if you're looking at something that has a lot of turns to it. You know, how often do you turn? How are you tracking? Do you have a strong CRM system? Do you have a system that's monitoring inventory levels and knowing when to rebuy? And you need to rebuy in September. Let's say you're down 50%. You're going to buy in September, but it also takes you 2 months to get the product. Well, you can't actually pull the trigger today. You should have pulled the trigger back in June, right? And so now you're going to be carrying inventory, and so that adds cost to what's going on. So there's a lot of different factors, but not impossible. And so what I tell clients, because I get questions all the time, how are we going to measure this? And so from a marketing standpoint, since there are no pure measures, I can't tell if somebody saw a LinkedIn ad, then went to our website, then read one of our newsletters, then contacted a distributor, and then the sale happened 2 months later. It's just hard. You can do first touch and things like that in Google Analytics, but again, it's hard to make that fully tracked. Can do it better on the consumer side because of attribution models. And so I always say, let's set up how we're going to judge. Are we going to judge how many leads come in? We're going to judge um, how many leads come in, how many bids you gave. That we could do. You can't hold marketing accountable for the actual sale because we're not making the sale. Are we going to look at site visitors? You've got whatever, 50 site visitors today. Our goal is to get 1,000 in 6 months. We can track that. We can track likes and those kinds of things. And again, it's back to what are your goals? Are you building awareness? Are you driving leads? Are you making turnkeys? Um, and so by setting those all up front and then putting some um, value against those. It could even
Mm,
be a waiting value. This was years ago when in we were doing PR, and one of the things clients would say, I want to be in Business Week or whatever it happens to be. Well, we would weight those and say a Business Week is, a number one opportunity. If we got you, an article that was 200 words or 400 words, and we bought that space and blah, 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 it would be worth X. And so we were kind of set benchmarks against what things would be of value. And so that was a way we could do some measurement. So there's ways to get around it, but trade shows are difficult, but not impossible, right? It requires a good, strong CRM, someone paying attention to it, monitoring, right? You come back, you talk to 50 people. Now you're trying to reach out to them. Let's say 30 decide to engage. And out of those 30, 20 actually ask for a quote. And out of those 20, 10 actually buy. And, they're worth X. One of my clients, we did a lot of research with their data, and we found that 30% of all their proposals, and this is over a 25-year history, 30% of all their they won 30% of all their proposals. Great number.
yeah.
Now, the question is, because they also sold, in some cases, they might get $1,000 order. In some cases, they got a 10,000. In some cases, they got a $250,000 order. So strategically, what markets were driving that? And then where do we want to focus our salespeople? Do I really want my top salesperson spending time on 100 accounts that might only add up to 10,000 or 20 or $30,000, or would I rather have them chasing the 250 or $300,000 orders? And so we were able to break down those metrics and understand where the bids were coming from, or the history of clients. We knew how many vertical markets. We knew which vertical markets were really generating opportunities for us. And so we could refocus our people and say, okay, where are these types of businesses across the country? In this case, that it was malls and shopping centers and things like that. So we're the big ones. We're the ones that most likely going to use our product and service. Now let's set up a campaign to target them, knowing that we're not going to get all of them, but let's say we can get one or two, and next year we can get another one or two. And so we developed that strategy and how to go across the country and target these organizations. We weren't happening cars at this point in time, we're flying, but just from corporate headquarters. And we were able to, because we had done some other research and had some knowledge, we were able to start knocking that down. And so we were able to say then, in order to get a sale like this, it's going to take, marketing dollars, it's going to take people, it's going to take this, and this is going to be our total cost to win this business. If we win this business, then this would be our return on investment. Again, not taking into operational costs and things like that, but just a pure, what's the cost of sales? What's the cost of goods? What's the time and energy it took to win it? And, what do you have left over? So we tried to keep it more simple than complex. But again, that was just an example. or those have been examples of how you can just set up your metrics even when there isn't a, "Hey, I sold 50 products today," right?
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. Definitely. It's case to case. Great. Angelo, so if our listeners they would like to connect with you and get a hold of the wonderful, the absolutely, really, really great work that you are doing in terms of strategic marketing and then also fractional CMO, what would be the best way?
The best way is LinkedIn. From LinkedIn, you can get to my website, which has a free mini marketing course, has some free downloads, ebooks, a bunch of videos, and then a link to my book, which is called The Strategy Blueprint. It's on Amazon, both paperback and Kindle. And a lot of what we talk about today is kind of in that book. I mean, that's why it's called the Strategy Blueprint. It's it's really that foundational work, as well as a chapter on fractional CMOs.
No, awesome. I'll make sure to have all the links in the show notes and
Thank you.
Angelo, fantastic. Such a rich conversation. It's in golden nuggets, case studies, so many examples. I think this was really, really such a fundamental, discussion towards strategic marketing and also the unique role of a fractional CMO. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to talk to your audience.
So, to all the listeners out there, if you have been struggling with inconsistent marketing results or you are unsure how to scale effectively, I am absolutely confident that this conversation is your wake up call. So, thank you to all for tuning into BizBlend. If you love today's episode, please share it with a fellow business leader who needs these insights. Until next time, this is your host, Sana, reminding you to blend strategy with execution. Thank you.